All right, this is lab 13 for the Azure Monitor. Now in this lab, we'll deploy virtual machine on the Azure platform, create a log analytic workspace, connect the VM to submit event logs to this log analytic workspace, and capture performance counters into the log analytics. And we're going to try to query the data warehouse that's built by the log analytics. Now we're going to turn up PowerShell, create a resource group in the East US region. We're going to use the PowerShell commandlet to quickly deploy a brand new virtual machine. Now this creation will take roughly about 3 minutes. We'll fast forward that. While this log analytics, while this VM is being created, I want to take some time to go over that log analytics workspace serves as a repository for logs, performance metrics. Okay, when data is sent to this log analytic workspace, a data warehouse is built on top of that, and a special language called custom query language can be used to query and make sense of the data that's stored. Now, because log analytics is native to Azure, when you deploy an Azure VM, we can simply connect the VMs on the Azure platform to the log analytics. Additionally, if we have virtual machine running outside of the Azure environment, if we have VMs in Amazon on-prem, we can install the Microsoft monitoring agent, and then wherever the machines lives, it can always be sent to the workspace. It's a REST ingestion point. All right, looks like the VM is completed. We're going to create a resource for log analytics workspace. Now keep in mind the log analytics can be created in any region. VMs from any resource group, any subscriptions, even machines that are running on-prem, will have no problem sending the data to it because it's a internet accessible endpoint. As long as you know the workspace ID, as long as you know the workspace key, anyone from anywhere, IoT device, full-fledged physical boxes, even desktops can all send the data to the workspace. All right, so we're going to navigate to the log analytic workspace. Typically, the first thing that happens is that we will connect data sources to the log analytic workspace. So as you scroll down, you'll find workspace data sources. All right. So because the machine we want to monitor is an Azure virtual machine, okay, just select that. All right, so after I created log analytics workspace, I had to wait about 5 minutes for this virtual machine to show up on the screen. I don't know if it's a temporary UI bug or just my browser or something. For me, it took 5 minutes for this VM to show up. Now, this is not the only user interface that you can connect a virtual machine. You can do right here, click on that, and then just connect it right here. Now, if this UI is not showing your virtual machine, feel free to click on virtual machine, select my VM, and down in the virtual machine monitoring, you'll find a menu item called logs. This will achieve the same results, connecting this virtual machine to the log analytic workspace. All right, so select enable. This will be connecting this machine to the workspace that we created earlier. So there's that. So in about a few minutes, this machine will start sending logs and metrics to the workspace. Now, in the meanwhile, in this workspace, you'll find a section called Agent Management. In the Agent Management, you can download Windows Agent and install it anywhere Windows runs. The two pieces of data you need to provide is a workspace ID that identifies this workspace, and one of these two keys. And these keys are necessary to sign the data you want to send into the workspace. Now, if you're Linux servers you want to monitor, here's your Linux server, and there's also the same thing. You need to supply workspace ID and one of the keys for them to submit the data into workspace. Alright, so once we have these machines under management, we can go ahead and customize what type of information we would like to receive. Alright, we're going to select data. So here's where we can specify what information we would like to collect. We're going to select system log. And at what level of the log entries. Right. We can also collect Windows Performance Counter. And we're going to just add the suggested performance counter. So the data has a 10-second collection interval. Alright, don't forget to click save to save all the changes. Alright, so there's acknowledgement, configuration was successfully saved. So when the agent receives these directives, it will start sending the data into the log analytics. Now back to the workspace. There is a user interface where you can issue ad hoc queries. There's also a workbook which you can save some of the commonly used queries. Alright, so for example, you can use this pre-built workbook that contains the query. Alright, so because we just recently deployed the agent, we don't have any data at the moment. Okay. Log Analytics is not a real-time solution. Event Hub is. So anytime the data that makes into the Log Analytic workspace, be prepared that there will be some leading time to populate the data warehouse, ingest it. This is a massive system. So it's designed to give you trend and analytic capability to the logs. Okay, so they are not really a real-time response system. If you need something to respond in real time, you may want to consider build something with Event Hub. Okay, so that is your real-time solution. So for the time being, I'll pause it until we get the data in. Okay, so you can click on the logs, and you can review the raw logs that has been received. So this interface is where you would execute queries, and there are tons and tons of examples. All right. And perhaps we have a virtual machine, sample queries. So select virtual machines. You can say track availabilities, available memory, free disk space. Alright, so I'm going to run failed login to see if there has been any failed logins. Alright. So at the moment there has been no security event collected. So to find out what data is available to you, switch over to tables. Now this will show you all the tables that's available in the workspace. All right. So when you navigate to the table, log storage, you can do a quick preview data. Okay. So it looks like we do have some data here. Okay. Now one thing you'll notice that this is slightly different from the traditional log where everything is two-dimensional columns and rows. These can have nested information. For example, DNS names. They can have child nested property. So unfortunately, this doesn't have any security event. So I'm going to try a different one. Alright, so I'm going to say what is the available memory. Okay, again, still no result found. Okay, so this is querying the performance counter and the time limit. Okay, so it's looking for data was generated an hour ago. Since the last hour, not an hour ago. Greater. Time's always increasing, so time generated is greater than an hour ago. We're looking for the metric for memory. Okay. All right, and counter and equal available megabytes, or okay, there's that. Alright, so let's take a look and see if we have any data in the perf just yet. Alright, so it hasn't been received yet. So while this works, there's looks like there is some data. Interesting. I thought I just previewed it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Just in time. Okay, so now we can collect these metrics. We can concentrate them all in one place. Okay, we can write very powerful queries. Against all these services, and you'll notice, because you probably notice this huge list. That is because Microsoft's platform as service all use log analytics as their default log storage. Yeah, because remember, these platform as service runs on machines. They run on machines that we don't control and we don't maintain. But we need logs. We need to know what happened with these services. So just about universally, if you have any service, okay, whether it's a logic app, function app, web app, okay, chances are there is a diagnostic settings where you can point their logs into this workspace. All right, for example, key vaults. All right, so if you have that service, you can connect to log analytics, and this can help you make sense of it. All right, so that concludes this log analytics exercise. Now, it's important to remember for this lab 13, do not delete the resource you create. We're going to use it immediately in lab number 14. Number 15, the Azure Sentinel. So please keep this 13 resource around for a while, the VM and the data. We're just going to leave there. Lab number 14, we'll be looking at Azure Security Center feature. So the first thing we're going to do in this lab, we will configure Security Center to watch over our virtual machine, upgrade the pricing tier to standard. We'll review recommendations once the machine has been scanned by the Security Center. we'll take a look at some recommendation that was generated, perhaps implement them, implement some of the recommended configuration to improve security. We'll also look at a feature called just-in-time VM access. Now this will dynamically create NSGs to protect our virtual machines. Alright, and we'll see the secure score can be used to compare or determine the relative security postures of our infrastructure. Alright, so let's navigate to the Azure Security Center. Now we should have getting started. So at the moment, the Defender plan is off. We can select upgrade. Okay. Now when you select upgrade, you should be able to see your pricing tier and settings of your subscription. Just like that. Alright, so we have the Azure Defender turned on. And at the moment there is one virtual machine in our subscription. Alright, now we're going to go to the data collection. Now we want to review a setting known as auto provisioning. Now make sure that you know that if you enable this auto provisioning, any new VM that you deploy or existing VM. Okay, so this will apply to all the new VM you will create and any existing VM in your subscription. Okay, and if they don't have a log analytic agent extension, this will deploy them automatically. In the last module, we had to do it manually because we don't have this auto provisioning. All right. All right. We can choose the log analytic workspace that we had created in the lab 13. So rather than creating yet another workspace, I am just going to use another workspace. Okay. Now this should not affect us because our machine's connected to the same log analytic workspace. Right. Give it a second to save. Alright, so now I'm going to navigate to workflow automation. These workflow automation allows to trigger action based on things that's detected by the security center. Okay. Look. So this is where you can configure an alert based on threat detection or based on security center recommendations. All right. All right, so I'm going to put in that resource group. So in the event that there is a security center recommendation, regardless of what recommendation that is, and regardless what severity that is, regardless whether it's not applicable, healthy or unhealthy, okay, we can specify the logic app that you would like to trigger. All right, so notice we don't have a logic app at the moment. We can go and create one and then come back and select this workflow automation. All right. So if you want to respond to the recommendations or alerts, you can create a new logic app, and the process is designed for non-developers. This is no code alert response. So I'm going to create a sec center demo app. All right, let's keep that in East US. A logic app lets you pick and choose the triggers, the logic steps that should execute in response to those triggers. So I'm going to create one. All right, I'm going to click on Go to Resource. I will start with a blank logic app. Every logic app begins with a trigger, and the one that we are concerned of is the Security Center. So there are two kinds of triggers: Security Center recommendations or alerts. All right, so I'm going to select that, and this will say when the recommendation is created or triggered. All right, so the next step, what do I want to do when that happens? Okay, perhaps I want to send myself a text message, send me an email. So I'm going to just say, oh, look. All right, so I can select that. I can have a bunch of other operation take place. Okay. There's no actions for Security Center. Okay. Now, if you have a help desk ticketing system, okay. If you don't have a CRM, you can have the action trigger functionality in those services, create records, and so on. All right, so this is a brief demo of Logic App. Just to quickly sidetrack to show you what this means when we talk about workflow automation. So not only recommendations, you can also have threat detection alert. Okay, so what is the alert name contains certain keywords. So these are all the potential alerts names. Okay. All right, so these are all potential security alert. Now you can use that threat detection alert of a certain severity to trigger a Logic App action again. All right. So remember, Logic App is this codeless workflow environment. So I'm going to cancel that. All right, so now we're going to head back to the Security Center to see if we have any recommendations. If not, I'm going to have to pause it and wait for a few before we come back here. Alright, it's taking a bit long to load. I'm going to go straight to overviews. Alright, so I'm going to pause it for a while until the data comes in. Alright folks, at the time of this recording, looks like the Azure Security Center is bombing really hard. So not 100% know if I could fix this. I'm going to switch over to another tenant where you can see the Security Center recommendations as well as see the just-in-time access. Alright, so the security score, once evaluated and becomes available to you, you should be able to see them under security scores. Now, the security score is assessed based on detected vulnerability, best practices. Okay, so you'll see a list of potential remediations to increase the security scores. All right. Now, in order to improve your secure score, you have to remediate some of these recommendations. So when you select, in this example, secure transfer to storage account should be enabled. So in this recommendation, now some recommendations are straightforward, so you might get a one-click fix remediation, and that will apply the fix to the storage account. One of the very common recommendation in protecting VM access is to enable just-in-time VM access. Now, what this allows an organization is to protect these VM access through RDP and SSH. Once this is enabled on the VM, any request to connect to these management ports, SSH or RDP, requires a user to submit a request, okay, prior to make these ports available to the administrator. Now the Security Center identifies which VM should have just-in-time VM access applied. First, the decision is it already protected by JIT? If it's not, now this is the important one, is the VM assigned to a network security group? If the VM has no NSG, then it's going to consider, is this VM currently protected by an Azure firewall? If it's not so, well, JIT is not applicable because there's no places for JIT to inject a rule to block all incoming traffic. All right, so just-in-time VM access has to have the ability to inject something to block everything and then be able to create the allow rules just in time for the request. All right, so make sure you understand that if the VM doesn't have an NSG to begin with and there's no firewall in Azure firewall protecting the VM, and the machine is considered not applicable, it's still a risk. It's just that it's not something that JIT can help you with. All right. So if the VM does have NSG, does the NSG have allow rule on any one of these management ports? Okay. If the NSG does not allow any of those ports, then just-in-time VM access isn't needed because there is no remote management access to these VMs anyways. These are PowerShell remoting, SSH, and RDP. Now, if any of these management ports is open, do we have an Azure firewall standing in front of it? Now, if there isn't, we will recommend you to use JIT VM access to protect your machine. Okay. If there is one, does a firewall rule have allow rule for them? Okay, if they do, we also need to recommend just-in-time VM access. And once again, if they don't have any of these port open, it is a healthy VM. We don't need to protect it with JIT. All right, so manage just-in-time access. All right, first we have to sort of go to just-in-time access from the Azure Security Center. All right, look for one that's not configured. Select management port. Okay. How long should the port be open for? Or if the port should be open at all. So if you don't need certain port, this is a machine that doesn't need 3389, you can just turn it off. Alright, so this configures the machine for just-in-time VM access. Alright. Now for a machine that you would like to access, you're going to have to make a request for it. Alright. So one way you can go for it is just go to the just-in-time VM access page, go to configure, select machine, and request access. Now you got to do this once you finish requesting access and the port is now open. You'll have a time period which you can access this port. All right. Alright, so folks, this is module 15. We'll be working with the Azure Sentinel feature. Alright, so let's take a look. Azure Sentinel. Alright. So we're going to add the workspace, log analytic workspace, to the Azure Sentinel service. Now we're arrived at Azure Sentinel. The first step, connecting data. we got to feed data into this Azure Sentinel to be able to get custom rules to detect threats, perform analytics, raise incident, and make responses. When you click on the data connector, you're going to see that there are many data sources that can feed into the Sentinel workspace. And the Sentinel is a intelligence analysis against all these data. So I'm going to select Azure Active Directory. When you select the connector, you're going to find a quick description and what does the connector come with. There'll be 4 workbooks, 2 queries, and 27 analytic rules templates. So click on Open Connector page. Alright, so in order to integrate with Azure Active Directory, you've got to have all of these, and you can see that these all have been checked. Alright, so perhaps I want to sign in and audit logs. Alright, so these are 27 analytic templates. Alright, so 2 sample queries. So let's take one of these. Alright, so if the log has been gathered and it's been stored here, we'll be able to see the results from these sample logs. Alright, so for this lab, we'll connect another connector called the Azure Activity. Now, the Azure Activity will be monitoring each subscription that you have access to. So we'll select Azure Activity, Open Connector page. So I have 2 subscriptions and I have 1 yet to connect. So I'm going to connect that. Alright, so now the activity log will feed into the Sentinel workspace. When the data is available, you can run these sample queries to see some data. Now from those data in Azure Activity, these are the analytic templates. All right. So for instance, if there is a suspicious number of resource creation, we can use this to create a rule. And the rule can raise an incident. So for instance, this one is suspicious number of resource creation. And how is this going to impact, how it's going to affect your environment? So in this case, just perhaps cost you money. All right, so here, this is the query. All right, that detects excessive number of resource creation. All right, so this query is meant to find out how many create or update virtual machine activity or create deployment. So this is going to show you for the last 7 days how many times did this operation occur. All right, so we have a pretty small amount of these activities during normal operations. All right, so we're going to have it run the query every day. It can also be more frequent. And look up data from the last 7 days. Okay, so if I have more than 100 deployment, then something is probably wrong. And I'm going to configure that, group all the events into a single alert. Okay. Now, whether or not I should stop running this query, as long as the alert has been triggered, so there's no reason to keep on alerting. Alright, so here in the incident settings, we can have an incident automatically created when this alert is triggered. Now we can also group multiple occurrence of this alert every 5 hours into a single incident. So that way we don't get overwhelmed by the number of alerts. All right, so 5 hours into a single incident. Okay. So rather than getting that repeated called every 5 hours, we can limit the group of alerts. All right. Whether or not to reopen an incident that has matching criteria, so reactivating incidents rather than creating new ones. All right. Now, whether or not you would like to have a playbook to automatically respond to this incident. In earlier section in the Azure Security Center, we could create a logic app to respond to it. Okay, so if we have a logic app can be assigned as the automated response. All right, so at the moment, doesn't look like I have any playbook defined, so I'm going to leave that. And this creates an analytic rule. Once again, these queries come with the various data connectors. Okay. And this will help you, for example, suspicious granting of permission to an account. All right, and the information in order to establish these noteworthy conditions comes from Azure activity logs. All right. Now, as you go through this list, you'll see that there are many systems that work with the Azure Sentinel. All right, you can even connect that the Azure Security Center services into this Azure Sentinel. All right. And automatically create an incident from connected service. Or you can enable that too. All right, and some of these packages gives you a recommended workbook. So think of this as a customizable dashboard. All right, so I'm going to save a copy of this workbook. Now, if the data for this workbook exists, this will run a query to show you the dashboard. Okay. All right, so it just doesn't look like it has the necessary data for this. So I'm going to go back and I am going to use another data connector. All right. Now again, this connector comes with a workbook called Azure Activity. All right. And go ahead and save a copy. And view saved workbook. All right. So when there is a available data, usually takes some time for the data to come in. Okay, once the data is in, then you'll be able to see these workbook and charts related to Azure activities. Right. So as long as this query returns nothing, that means the data hasn't quite come in yet. All right. Now, task for this lab, we will try to create a playbook. Right. A playbook is nothing more than a logic app. A logic app is defined entirely in JSON. Okay. So if we want to deploy a copy of existing logic app, it's the same as we deploying an ARM template. Now in the lab 15 folder, there is a ready-made logic app. Okay, so this logic app accepts the playbook. It defines the playbook name parameter and the user name parameter. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and we'll need to provide those two parameters. When this custom template is deployed, we'll have a logic app. Alright, so let's go to the resource we just created. Alright, so if you don't see the resource, just click on the refresh. And after you click the refresh, you'll find the logic app right here. Now typically a logic app contains connectors to different systems, and those connectors need to be authorized. All right. So here we'll select the tenant and authorize logic app to access the tenant information. All right. So here's a connection. All right. So after you squared away all the missing data, go ahead and click on Save. Now your logic app is ready to go. All right. So recall in the previous exercise in the Azure Sentinels, we created a rule, but we didn't have any playbook to respond to it. So we're going to navigate back to the analytics. All right. So here I can see my playbook has been defined. All right. So we had the suspicious number of activities. I'm going to go ahead and click on Edit. Go to Automated Response. Now, this is the logic app that gets triggered by Azure Sentinel alerts. All right. So we're going to go ahead and click on Save. All right. So this is how you can have a logic app respond to an Azure Sentinel alert. So to recap, Sentinel has lots of data connectors, both deployed on-prem or in the cloud. Okay, across different vendors, different systems. All right. Each one of the connectors provides you with a set of workbooks, sample queries, and if there's any analytic templates. Now these analytic templates can be customized to trigger alerts. They can also create incident, which can later be viewed from the Incident tab. Playbook can be associated with these analytics to automatically respond to these triggered events.